The first component of universal design for learning that we're going to discuss at the secondary level is the multiple means of representation. This includes how we're offering information to students. I'm going to play the video so that you have a strong idea of why multiple means of representation is important in every classroom. So the key there in that video is that everyone benefits from a universally designed classroom. And so we have to think about multiple means of representation from the perspective of how the student learns. And so the student learns based on three key areas. And the three guidelines provided by CAST to support multiple means of representation include perception, and that is the way we interact and have flexible content. Language and symbols, the way that it's communicated to us to create a shared understanding. That may be the print, that may be the technology resource we use, that may be sound, however that language is communicated with us. And the third component that we have to think about in this portion is comprehension. How do we allow learners to construct meaning for the concepts that we have just offered them? Do we provide methods that reach everybody? All three of these guidelines are critical in building a strong multiple means of representation in the classroom. One of the key reasons that BlendEd came about is because we realized that not all students perceive, read, hear, or comprehend information in the same manner. There are several ideas and methods and supports that you can use in a universally designed classroom. If you think back and use that resource that was provided in the previous video on the list of items, I'm going to briefly go over those because you can review those in that list as well. But we really have to think about one of the examples he gave in the video is that you may have a visually impaired student who is trying to access your content. That is going to be dependent upon the size of the image, the bolding, the images, the graphs. Is it in Braille? Is it other types of visual content? If visual is not something that that student can access, how are we offering that? The color, does it guide people through a presentation? Does it make things move? Does it highlight emphasis? Are we helping that person to tell their brain and process that to perceive it as an important feature? Do we provide visual diagrams and charts to help somebody truly understand and get a deeper perspective of that? Because that's what helps us comprehend and bring that material together. Do we provide physical objects and spatial models to convey perception? So maybe someone does not see the mathematical concept up on the board, but if you give them physical objects in that concrete representational component, they may do that. Do we allow for a competent aid or partner to read aloud? Do they have a speech to text software? Do we pre-teach critical skills? Do we think about the steps that come in? When we're intentional, we think about our vocabulary and we think about the talk and the discussion that must take place. And so are we doing that? Even when we take someone out on a work-based learning, are we pre-teaching them the vocabulary or the scenes that they may have within the workplace? If we take them to the grocery store to practice budgeting, did we pre-teach them the skills or the vocabulary that they needed? Do we outline the important components? Do we provide something that tells them what is important? Do we provide checklists, organizers, sticky notes, electronic reminders to help them move through the components that we're teaching them? And the key thing to remember is providing explicit supported opportunities to generalize learning to new situations is something we should do at all times. Whether it's in transition, whether it's in the general education secondary classroom, are we helping them through that cognitive comprehension process to generalize it, to become what that middle circle in that first video was, independent? So we have math and numerical data. Now, this may take place in the workplace. This may take place in a budgeting class. This may take place in leasing, teaching them to lease an apartment. Math goes beyond, and especially is so critical when we're talking about transition. Do we allot for memory concerns? Are we providing them skills, guidance, resources to be able to bring those memory and that working memory component back? Maybe a student doesn't multiply well and they have to go to the store and figure out how much 5 bags of rice is going to cost, but we could provide them with resources and tools to be able to do that. And we can have that ready and have it embedded in the instructional component. We can embed support for unfamiliar references within the text. We can use a comprehensive language strategy where we are explaining those things. It doesn't mean we ignore them, but we just add an extra definition to it. Do we allow for flexibility and easy access to notations and things? So are we going to provide them signs that maybe are in Braille if we go to the grocery store? Are we going to pre-prepare for that lesson? Or are we going to get there and then try to make do? Do we give explicit prompts for each step in a sequential process? This is one where I am not 100% certain that we do this for every student, but I do believe that every student would benefit. Eventually, these types of things can be faded out, but we have to remember that they may need that support. So when we're talking about reading support, which this course covers, and when we're talking about transition support, one of the greatest tools that I think I can provide to you, and I know we've talked about it before, is Microsoft Immersive Reader. Microsoft Immersive Reader is available for free. It will do absolutely everything you need, whether it is reading your history textbook or reading directions for a cooking class, or whether it is going out in the community and having to read a menu. You would be able to upload it into Microsoft Immersive Reader and it would read it out loud. In addition, it will change the language for you. So I'm not going to play the video because it is a 15 to 20-minute video, but I will provide it as a resource for you. But this tool is the one-size-fits-all support for individuals who may struggle with that perception piece. How are we making sure the text is large enough? Because this will automatically increase the size for you. So we've also provided an example for you of how to use Prezi. Prezi is something that I used in the transition walk to transition assessments that you will be seeing in future weeks. But Prezi is an amazing resource. I'm going to show you an example of how it can create that movement, how you can have interaction within Prezi, how you can basically move through using movement. And so some students may need things chunked and they may need it broken down. Prezi is an excellent way to chunk information. A lot of our accommodations modifications say chunking is important. Well, chunking is not only important for students with disabilities, but it's also important for all students at the secondary level. So that's why it's important in a universally designed system. So we are able to delve a little deeper and to help them with that sequential thought process as they move through something. And that's where Prezi can come in and be an amazing resource for you. Even if a student is trying to process the comprehension of a book, a novel that they have to read, or if they're trying to remember how to build a sandwich in a restaurant that they're working in. You can use Prezi to do the steps and then they can work through them before they even go out there and be able to have that notes. Another very important resource is using graphic organizers. And I've given you some links and some resources to free graphic organizers that you could use. Graphic organizers follow that exact same process for representation, where you're guiding them through. Remember that last step of the previous slide was to provide sequential processes. That's why the Kansas writing strategies are so effective, and why all of the Kansas methods are so effective is because they provide a sequential process. So you have to remember that graphic organizers can guide that 1-step, 2-step, 3-step. You can record information for students. You can make video models that you can use to be able to teach skills. You can use Lucidcharts. I don't know if you've ever, we'll see if I can access this. Lucidcharts is a great way to create flowcharts, and it is a free resource. And so you'll come here and you'll create your account, and then you could have a student make their own step process. So say that they are going out and they're working, or they're gonna go to the grocery store and look for 5 items. Maybe they actually prepare that flow chart, or you've had that prepared for them ahead of time. That is an amazing resource. Another one is the Frayer model. When we talk about pre-teaching vocabulary, even at the secondary level, this probably has one of the most, I think it has one of the highest impacts that you possibly can use, especially when you're talking about vocabulary for reading or whatever. The Iris Center has some really strong modules. Obviously, I've pulled up the Spanish one, but it's the same thing. It's the vocabulary word or the term. You give the definition, you give the characteristics, you write an example, and then you have a non-example. And so following this type, even for work vocabulary, or if a student is going out and going to maybe take a band trip, you might give them the vocabulary that they're going to experience throughout that trip. We have to remember, though, that we always want to pair visual and auditory directions together. Offer it in multiple ways. That's the key of universal design, and that should be for every learner. Highlight each step on an instruction paper, support them, guide them. Use Post-its with the steps on them so that the student can tear one away when they are completed. We have to think about how we're representing these types of components to students so that they can grow and become independent thinkers that have had an equitable educational access. So that is a section on multiple means of representation and how we give that information to students and how we teach them. And we're going to talk next about multiple means of engagement.